Honored to be joined by filmmakers Craig Renaud and photojournalist producer Juan Arredondo, which, if I spoke Spanish, would sound much more beautiful. Maybe he will say his name once in this
I will.
episode so we can hear it beautifully. They're two veteran frontline storytellers whose work has taken them from Iraq and Haiti to Central America, Colombia, and Ukraine. Together, they've crafted the Oscar nominated documentary short, Armed Only with a Camera: The Life and Death of Brent Renaud, a searingly intimate portrait of Craig's late brother and collaborator that also pays tribute to the risks war journalists take to bear witness. We'll be talking about how they shaped Brent's final journey from Ukraine into a powerful meditation on conflict reporting, memory, and legacy, and what it means to keep picking up a camera when journalism itself is under threat. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. That's such a wonderful introduction. Thank you.
Yeah. But Juan, will you say your last name for us just so people
Sure.
actually?
My full name is Juan Arredondo.
I love Spanish. That's beautiful. Thank you. Okay. Armed Only with a Camera is both a portrait of Brent and a reckoning with the risks you both took for decades in conflict zones. When did you know that Brent's death in Ukraine had to become a film? And what perspective did you feel only you could bring to telling this story?
It was pretty immediate. Brent and I had been covering conflicts for 20 years and lots of conversations over the years about what do we do if somebody's killed. And we made a promise to each other that we would keep filming, that we shouldn't stop telling the story if that were to happen to one of us. After the chaos of first learning that Brent was killed and it hitting world news. I mean, that was something that I think hasn't been talked about a lot and most people don't understand is, imagine you find out your brother, loved one has been killed, but before you can even call your mom and sister to inform them, it's already hitting the wire and it's world news. So I literally had to wake up my mom and my sister frantically before somebody else notified them because it was all over the news. So once that all calmed down, I was making plans to get to Ukraine immediately with my camera, not only to keep filming, but also to try to figure out, how do I get Brent out of Ukraine and back to my family for a funeral? And how do we get Juan out of a hospital that's being actively bombed?
Yeah, and I think for us, I mean, for at least for me, it was we at the beginning thought of that the focus of the film was going to be the conflict, the invasion of Russia into Ukraine territory. And I remember first our conversations were we were concerned that maybe the conflict would end soon, but this week marks the fourth year of the invasion carrying on, and so it's a constant reminder how terrible war is, how long it could drag, and the people that are affected, not only civilians, but as we see in this film, is also journalists, and in this case, my friend and colleague Brent.
The film follows Brent's journey home from Ukraine while interweaving 2 decades of your joint reporting from Iraq, Haiti, Honduras, back to Ukraine. How did you arrive at the structural spine, this kind of parallel journey through space and time, as the way to hold his life and death and legacy in one short film?
Well, Brent was always a cinema verite documentary filmmaker, as am I. And, so I wanted the film to be told in the present because when we would cover conflicts, we would never interview people after the fact about what happened. It was always really important for us to be in the present moment because we felt like that was more powerful of a way to put viewers right there with innocent people while they were going through these conflicts. And so I wanted most of the film and the main narrative thread to be in the present moment of me bringing Brent home. If you notice in the film, there's no sit down interviews talking about what happened to him. It's all in the present as I'm journeying back from Ukraine with Brent. And then the decision to then tell Brent's story through these flashbacks of conflicts that we've covered over the years in our childhood and other information about Brent, I wanted to keep that same consistent style. So when it cuts away to these other moments, it's still very much in the present, and we felt that that also was a way of keeping Brent alive in the film, even after he's killed in Ukraine in the film. In the beginning, it'll cut away and you're very much with Brent in another country, 10, 15 years ago as he's interacting with people. So that's how we arrived at that narrative thread. And mostly as we were editing this, we were digging through 20 plus years of archives, trying to find moments where Brent's compassion would come through in his voice, which again was not easy because we don't put ourselves in our films typically. So it was a lot of digging to try to have that, feel very present even when you're flashing back 10, 15, 20 years sometimes.
Yeah, and Tom, I think for me, one of the gifts of this film is that Craig and his family and Brent's family allowed me to dig through Brent's journals. Brent was a very prolific writer. He would also keep journals of almost all the trips in which I came across a lot of reflections about the work, about his work, his presence in some of these areas. And so I think that was part of our work, was trying to sort through all this information that we had and to pick the best structure. But as Craig said, we're never in front of the camera. We're not present in most of most of the work that we do as a photojournalist. I'm always behind the camera. So it felt very unusual for me as well, and for us to be putting ourselves in the film. But I think that's worked at the end to tell the better story.
What were the hardest editorial decisions in choosing which past conflicts and characters to bring into the film? And was there one particular sequence that became a key to understanding who Brent was as a filmmaker?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge was just how much footage we had to work with, you know? I mean, we were, for example, embedded in Iraq for an entire year of war, and when we were in conflict zones, we realized that if you're not filming nonstop all the time and an attack takes place, you'll miss the entire thing. And so, we would literally in Iraq always have cameras rolling every second. You'll see in the film there's a major ambush that Brent and I were in Iraq where you see the RPG come out of nowhere, and that's because we were always filming. And so in the edit, that was very difficult. I mean, thousands and thousands of hours of footage that we were sifting through trying to find these moments that we felt would really speak to Brent, who he was. And then we would get lucky, I mean, my favorite moment in the film is the man in Somalia. Brent, captured one of the biggest car bombs in Somalia's history and was filming in a hospital with wounded patients. And a man was watching him from across the room and calls him over. And the man is badly burned all over his body, but wanted to tell Brent that he had been watching him and tell him that the way he held the camera, he was doing it from his heart. And I remember when I came across that footage, I just had chills all over me because it spoke so perfectly to who Brent was, and that somebody could be watching him and seeing his compassion from across the room. And I really love that moment because I feel like it really shows that even in times of war, you can have this shared humanity between a person and the filmmaker and journalist. And we've all had those moments. And I know a lot of times the questions to us are, how do you deal with these horrific things that you film? But there's equal times that we have those kind of moments and interactions with people that make it all worthwhile.
Yeah. And Juan, you're not just a producer, but also a fellow frontline documentarian with your own history in Colombia, Central America, and Ukraine. I wonder how your perspective, as someone who understands both the ethics and adrenaline of conflict reporting, also helped shape the film's tone and approach to Brent's final days.
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, Veritas style filmmaking, it lends itself it's very close to photojournalism, and the way I approach most of my stories are the same way that the Renaud brothers have done over the decades. So it felt like almost like a very natural progression, at least from coming from still image to moving image. And so it was finding these moments. I think my role always been to support Craig in the best way possible and sorting through these images. It was just finding that the same practices that we do. I think in many times the practice of nonstop rolling, I think of keep recording, it's often that practice. I think in photojournalism, we just want to get that one perfect picture. But what allowed us in this film was that the archives are so vast and rich, which also made it a challenge to find these little nuggets and moments of Brent interaction with people. And I think that's often remove when we do reporting. We don't see the efforts and we don't see how much we invest in the stories, the interactions. It almost feels like a very transactional. And what I hope to achieve with this film is that you see someone who was very compassionate, who was very invested in their stories, a great listener, but almost someone who spent a lot of time with their subjects to understand the topic, the issue, their predicament, what they were going through. And I think that's often, again, removed when we see a front page, when we see a reporting. It's almost very clinical, very dry. But behind that, there's a human being with a great heart, such as what Brent always took to the field, and that's one of the gifts that I got to witness and work with him, was the level of compassion and the level of investment that he had in the stories that we were reporting on.
Actually, you really do give us a unique glimpse into his reporting on the verite. Their moments are very distinctive, I mean, and memorable, even when they're harrowing or painful or tragic. They're very unique. Again, it's not what you normally see in the news at all, as you're saying. Craig, much of your earlier work, Off to War, Dope Sick, Love, Meth Storm, Last Chance High, places viewers alongside people in crisis while keeping you largely invisible. So, what was it like to turn the camera, in a sense, onto your own family story? And did that require different rules or boundaries for you than in your previous verite projects?
Yeah, it was difficult, and I think even Brent would not have been comfortable with being the focus of this film in the way that he was. But it was necessary, and in an instant when they were attacked and Brent was killed, we became part of this story. Me as his brother, Juan as somebody that was injured with him, and Brent as the one who was killed. And that took a lot of delicate balance in the edit room, a lot of conversations with our team, watching these cuts over and over again with our executive producers like John Alpert, who Brent and I first went to war zones with, and trying to find that balance where it was enough to tell that story, but not make it about us, and keep it squarely on Brent and the people that Brent interacted with. So, I mean, right down to the very end of finishing this film, we were playing with that balance. And it was challenging. It was definitely uncomfortable for me trying to figure out how much to put myself in the film, and the same for Juan.
Yeah, no, I think always in the back of my mind, and I know we had conversations with Craig, was how much do we are we exploiting Brent's story, and how much, they always have that balance. And at least for me, it was always questioning whether am I putting myself too much in the film, or is it necessary for to doing that? And we kept playing with it. But I feel the structure needed, especially if it's a film by your brother, like Craig needed to be in it. And I remember having him conversations with Craig, and it's like, we just have to, get over that, because I think that would serve better the story. But as Craig said, is we became part of the story. I think the moment I was attacked and I was evacuated from Ukraine, from Tel Aviv, that's the moment that I realized, now I'm part of the story that Brent and I went there to tell. And so it is uncomfortable, but I think it served the film its purpose.
And it's generous of you to share your own stories and the family story and the memorial service. It's beautiful, it's memorable. But you're right. I mean, it's in service of a much larger story, which is really a tribute to all war journalists. And you made this film in partnership with organizations like the Committee to Protect Journalists and the James Foley Foundation. I wonder how their involvement informed the kind of ethical conversations you were having about how much danger to show or grief to reveal, and what responsibility filmmakers like you have to younger journalists who are coming up now. You don't want to scare them out of reporting. We
Yeah.
need them now more than ever.
Yeah. I mean, those partnerships with Committee to Protect Journalists and James Foley Foundation were very important. And I think it helped us keep our mind focused on the bigger picture. We were making a tribute to Brent, but Brent was part of a much bigger story. I mean, in the 3 years that we edited this film, every day it felt like while we were editing, more journalists were being killed. And I think that helped us really think about, even in the editing decisions, that this needed to be a tribute to all frontline journalists that do this work. And Brent could be somebody who we dive deeper to understand what journalists are doing when they put their lives on the line to tell these stories. But since Brent was killed, there's been over 400 journalists killed around the world, and there's 333 as of a few days ago locked up overseas. And so we just wanted to not let those people ever be forgotten. And as you mentioned, it's more important now than ever for journalists to stick together and tell these stories. And for young people getting into this work, it is very different. When we started doing this work 20 years ago, we were concerned for our safety, but we were not as concerned about being targeted. And that's something that's very front and center now that young people have to know about. Juan is a professor and has to talk to students about these different approaches. And I think there's a a war on the truth right now that is very different. And what is real, what is reality, what is the truth is something that has become harder and harder for journalists to report on. So I think those are very important things.
Yeah, and I'll echo most of what Craig said, and also because I think we get a glimpse in this film to the family and the relatives. The unique axis of this film is that it shows the people who are left behind with the grief and the pain of losing someone. As Craig mentioned, CPJ has reported last year was one of the deadliest years against journalists. And so, what happens to the families and what is that process like? We've always been, I think we're removed from the people who make the news because we're so concerned about objectivity, truth, presenting the facts, verifiable facts. And I think that always removes the reporter from the reporting. And I think this is the chance in this film is to show that there is someone behind it, his method and the way he went about reporting. But also part of this film and the partnership with CPJ and the Foley Foundation is to bring resources to the next generation. As I'm a professor of journalism, and I can tell you that there are many journalism schools, as much as we want our students to go to great media companies and media legacy companies and become successful, the truth of the matter is that most of us will become independent film journalists or filmmakers for that matter. And then we just have to. And how do you go into the reporting conflict? When I first started, the typical way was just to buy a ticket, show up. I mean, I'm presuming some people want to go right now into Iran or Palestine. There's unnecessary risks involved in doing that kind of work. So I think that responsibility lies on the media companies, but also on us to provide resources. So with CPJ, I have put up a website with resources. They're constantly updated in terms of insurance. What kind of gear do you need? What kind of tactical training or first aid training you need to go into these areas so people are better prepared. We need to have that doesn't mean we shouldn't be encouraging people to report on these areas because we see more and more this attack on truth. A year ago, our president was saying how Ukraine was the perpetrators who started this conflict. And that's our role, first and foremost, is to witness history and to document. And so we need more. We need that next generation to come. And hopefully through this film and the resources with these partnerships, we can provide better understanding and how to go about it.
Yeah, definitely. I wonder why the story felt right as a documentary short rather than a feature, and what kind of opportunities or constraints that presented for you in terms of pacing or emotional build or what you can show.
Yeah, it was a challenging decision. I mean, Brent and I had always done features and series. This is the first time I've ever done a documentary short, and it is challenging to get it all in that time frame. And we played around with a feature, but it just felt like that narrative thread that was so important to this of bringing Brent home. If you got too long, that would start to fall apart. If you spent too much time in other places, and also, it's a very, very heavy film to ask viewers to sit through. I mean, even at 38 minutes, we watched this a lot in theaters. Everybody comments it felt much longer than that. So, it's war, it's heavy material, and it felt like the right length at 38 minutes.
How did you think about cinematography and sound design, both in Brent's original shooting and then the new edit, as tools to kind of make viewers feel the reality of all the places where you shot this important verite footage without turning danger into spectacle in a way?
Yeah, I think sound was incredibly important in this film. I think the only thing you can't, people can't smell what a war zone smells like. I think that is a very powerful thing when you're in these places. And the next most powerful thing is sound, and even the absence of sound is important. I think equally as powerful of an explosion are these moments of silence, either in grief, viewing a casket or a coffin. Probably one of the most harrowing sounds in this film is the sound of Brent's coffin being glued shut with this metal lid as we're taking him out of Ukraine. That still haunts me. And so I think even those kind of sounds are important, and you don't want to overdo it because it's not. And Brent was never about just rushing to the front lines and capturing explosions. It was always about the characters and the people who are being impacted by that. So you need some of that to understand that it's war, but it's more about these moments like when Brent is with this woman whose son has been killed and she's crying into the bloody jeans that were cut off her son in Iraq. I mean, those moments are very quiet. And Brent, as a filmmaker, was very gifted at sitting in silence with people and not talking over them, not making himself a part of the story. And I think that's reflected in the sound or the absence of sound in this film.
You've created the Brent Renaud Foundation to mentor younger filmmakers, and this film itself feels like part of that legacy. So, when emerging documentarians watch your amazing short, Armed Only with a Camera, what conversations do you hope they'll have with themselves? Why pick up a camera? How far they should go? And well, you've spoken a little to what support they need before entering a conflict zone. That's very helpful too.
Yeah, Juan and I talk about this a lot, and I think we often think about when we were young filmmakers and journalists what we needed the most. And, Juan talked about the safety, but I also think it's really important to have a community of filmmakers and journalists that you can lean on. And it's a pretty small circle. I mean, when we were in Iraq or other places, there's a camaraderie amongst journalists. You help each other, you support each other, you keep each other safe, you give each other tips. And I think most importantly, when you come back, there's very few people that understand what you have gone through. And for Juan and I, that was extremely important for healing while we were making this film. If Juan was having a bad day, he was reaching out to me and the opposite. And I think that's something through the foundation that we also want to do is make sure that we have a community of veteran seasoned journalists who can be there for these younger journalists as they're dealing with what they've witnessed at war and trying to process that when they come back.
This process is very much of mentorship. I think for me, one of the gifts and what I will always be grateful to Brent was that, he opened this door into the documentary film world for me. And then later working with Craig and Brent. And so this is a way of giving back to the next generation is mentorship. And it could be something as simple as looking over their a cut or advising them what schools to attend to or just sharing our experiences with them. I think that has been a way I've grown as a professional, obviously as a photojournalist and now as a documentary filmmaker. I think mentorship meant a lot to Brent. I think for me, it was very surprising, unfortunately, after the death of Brent, to realize how many people he touched and how many people he helped and how many people he mentors. I think that's the foundation will carry on his legacy of helping others.
Since premiering at South by Southwest and now with this Oscar nomination, you've watched audiences encounter Brent through this film, some who knew his work and many who didn't. I wonder, has seeing their reactions changed anything about your own grief or sense of what Brent's body of work means in this moment when journalism is so under threat?
Yeah, it's been really incredible. I mean, we had full week, 7 days of screenings at the Downtown Community Television Center's theater. That's where Brent and I started in New York. That's where we learned how to be filmmakers. And they have a documentary theater there now. And just night after night for a week straight. I mean, it was journalists we didn't know who we respect. It was journalists and filmmakers we have worked with every single night just coming to pay their respects to Brent. And it was powerful. People crying at the end of the film, dealing with their own grief that they had, lost colleagues or experienced war and very deep conversations that would come out of this. We had a screening recently in San Francisco where a woman came up to me crying. Her uncle was a journalist in El Salvador and had been killed. And so it's been very impactful and more than we ever could have hoped for with Brent's story. We wanted to immortalize Brent. We wanted people to know his name. We wanted him to live forever. And it's remarkable to have done this. And it does. It helps our grieving too. I think for my mom and my sister and my whole family to have Brent honored in this way and people support our family through his story has really been helpful.
Yeah, and seeing the process of like what Craig mentioned when I remember that the South by Southwest veteran came to us and he was moved by the film, but he was more about how Brent and Craig have captured Iraq and the Arkansas National Guard. So he was very moved by that. He thanked us for having an open conversation about the trauma of covering conflicts. And for him, it resonated with him, the difficulties of grief and sometimes revisiting some of these traumatic events. And over this course almost of 10 months, it's seeing the progression of how these conversations have how gotten deeper. Recently, we were discussing how in early September, if you felt that people that were coming to our screenings were paralyzed. They were frustrated to what was happening here in the country and what to do. And I think they wanted some answers as like, what can we do? How can we sustain journalism?
Well, thank you both so much for having this conversation, which we hope will reach a wide audience. And good luck with the continuing journey of the film and in your careers. We'll follow you. We'll stay in touch. Thank you.
Appreciate it.